Ethan Blackwell sat behind a desk that overlooked the city skyline, a glass fortress perched on the 79th floor of one of Manhattan's tallest towers. The office was sleek, silent, and cold, just like the man who owned it. At only 35, Ethan had become a titan in the pharmaceutical world, a self-made billionaire whose name was both feared and revered across boardrooms and hospital corridors alike. His company, Blackwell Biotech, dominated the global market in cancer and rare disease treatments, but its reputation was far from noble. Ethan had built his empire with ruthless precision, trimming away anything, or anyone, that slowed down profit growth. Employees knew better than to get too comfortable. A single missed target or mistake could mean a pink slip by the end of the day. Department heads whispered about the time Ethan had terminated an entire research division overnight after a trial failed to deliver the projected numbers. He was notorious for slashing community health funding and pulling the plug on charity-linked drug programs, labeling them a waste of shareholder resources. Patients who once relied on subsidized treatment options found themselves drowning in medical debt. Compassion had no place in Ethan's empire. There was no employee wellness program, no donation drives, no outreach teams. At holiday galas, he would show up late, leave early, and never once give a speech, except for that infamous shareholder meeting where he stood before a room of investors and declared with icy confidence, "Empathy doesn't build empires. Profit does." The quote made headlines, trended on business sites, and became a rallying cry for soulless success. In private circles, he was called the Ice King, a nickname that stuck after a viral exposé described his office as colder than a morgue, both in temperature and energy. No one had seen Ethan smile, let alone express remorse. His emotional distance wasn't just a business tactic, it was his identity. The walls around him weren't just glass and steel, they were armor forged by years of sacrifice, betrayal, and pain no one dared ask about. In a world full of fragile egos and performative generosity, Ethan Blackwell was a different breed. Cold, calculating, and completely unreachable. Or so the world thought. Amelia Clark sat alone in the university library long after most of the students had gone home. Her laptop screen flickered softly, showing spreadsheets, scholarship applications, and hospital invoices stacked one over another like layers of a nightmare she couldn't wake from. At just 22 years old, Amelia was the embodiment of potential, a brilliant student with top grades, a keen analytical mind, and professors who praised her work ethic. But no amount of brilliance could pay for the reality that haunted her every moment. Her mother, Linda Clark, had been diagnosed with late-stage ovarian cancer just 4 months ago. It came suddenly, brutally, and aggressively. At first, the doctors were hopeful. But as the disease spread, so did the bills, rising faster than Amelia could possibly keep up with. Even though she juggled 2 part-time jobs, one tutoring freshmen in math, the other working nights at a 24-hour diner, every dollar she made evaporated before it reached her bank account. Rent, groceries, medical bills. Nothing stayed. And now, things had taken a darker turn. The hospital administrator had called her into a cold office that morning, speaking with clinical indifference as they informed her that without full payment up front, they could no longer proceed with her mother's chemotherapy. The words felt like a slap, an unfeeling sentence handed down in monotone. Policy, they said. Amelia had argued, cried, even offered a post-dated check she knew would bounce. But the answer was final. Her mother's life came with a price tag she simply couldn't afford. And what made it worse, achingly, gut-wrenchingly worse, was knowing that there was a drug out there that could save Linda's life. A revolutionary new treatment hailed as a miracle in medical journals, it had shown remarkable success in shrinking late-stage tumors. But the drug belonged to Blackwell Biotech. And like everything that company touched, it came at an astronomical cost. No subsidies. No discounts. No trials for the uninsured. Amelia had spent days calling clinics, charities, government offices, anyone who might offer help. But the answer was always the same, unless she could pay the full amount, in cash, up front, there was nothing they could do. The drug remained a distant beacon, locked behind corporate walls and profit margins. She even tried emailing Blackwell Biotech directly, pouring her heart into carefully written pleas for compassion, but no reply ever came. Now she was running out of time. Linda was growing weaker by the day, her once vibrant laughter now replaced by coughing fits and long, painful silences. And Amelia, who had always been the fixer, the planner, the one who found a way, was beginning to feel hopeless. She sat there in the library, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, silently debating what she would have to sell next. Her books? Her laptop? Her dignity? She didn't know. All she knew was that if she didn't find a miracle soon, she was going to lose the only person she had left in the world. The ballroom of the Grand Sterling Hotel was flooded with opulence, glimmering chandeliers, white-gloved servers, and rows of perfectly tailored suits and designer gowns. It was Blackwell Biotech's annual shareholder event, a night where power, wealth, and calculated charm came together under one roof. Ethan Blackwell stood at the front, delivering his numbers with mechanical precision. Charts flashed behind him showing growth, profits, expansion into global markets. The crowd of investors nodded approvingly, sipping champagne as they watched their wealth compound in real time. No one in that room gave a second thought to the lives behind the data, the sick, the desperate, the dying. No one, except the girl who had just slipped past the final checkpoint unnoticed, her breath shallow with anxiety and desperation. Amelia Clark had spent days planning how she'd get in. She'd borrowed a blazer from a friend, memorized the staff entrance schedules, and walked with the confidence of someone who had everything to lose. Her heart pounded as she moved among the crowd, her eyes fixed on the man who now seemed like the final gatekeeper between life and death. And as Ethan concluded his speech and silence swept the room in anticipation of the next agenda item, Amelia took a shaky breath and stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwell," she called out, her voice cutting across the polite murmurs. Heads turned, brows furrowed, and the air grew still. Security was on her instantly, reaching for her arms, but she wrestled free just long enough to shout, "Your drug can save my mom, why is that a crime?" The room buzzed with confusion and discomfort. Cameras clicked. A few people gasped. Ethan paused, his face unreadable as he looked down at the girl who had dared to interrupt his carefully polished evening. He took a step forward, and the crowd parted as if afraid of catching his displeasure. "Life isn't fair," he said flatly, adjusting the cuff of his jacket. "I never promised it would be." His voice was calm, cold, and sharp enough to slice through any remaining hope in the room. Amelia's mouth trembled. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The guards tightened their grip, ready to remove her for good. But before they could, she collapsed to her knees on the marble floor. Her legs gave way under the weight of fear, exhaustion, and the crushing realization that she was out of options. Her voice cracked as she cried out, tears streaming down her face, echoing through the vast ballroom. "Please, she's all I have." There was no dignity in her plea, no pride left to protect. Just a daughter begging a stranger for the life of her mother. The silence that followed was heavier than the chandeliers above. Amelia's sobs were the only sound in the room as Ethan stared down at her, unmoved. The shareholders looked away awkwardly, murmuring to one another, unsure if they were witnessing a scandal or just another PR problem. No one offered her a hand. No one asked her name. She was dragged away slowly, her cries growing quieter as the doors closed behind her, leaving only the cold hum of polite conversation resuming. But what Amelia didn't see, what no one did, was Ethan's fingers twitching slightly at his side, as if some long-buried nerve had just been struck for the first time in years. That night, the city lights shimmered through the wall-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Blackwell's penthouse like 1,000 unblinking eyes, but inside, all was still. The sleek interior was as pristine and lifeless as ever, polished concrete floors, chrome fixtures, and minimalist furniture that suggested wealth without warmth. Ethan stood alone in the dark, his jacket discarded, shirt collar loosened, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. But it wasn't the silence that unsettled him, it was her voice. That desperate voice. "Please, she's all I have." It played in his mind like a haunting melody he couldn't shake. Her tear-streaked face, the way her knees hit the marble floor, it wasn't the first time he'd seen someone fall apart. But it was the first time in years that it stayed with him. He tried to shake it off, retreating into his normal rhythm, emails, reports, performance forecasts, but nothing silenced the noise inside. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then curled into fists. He stood, pacing. That girl's face, it wasn't just desperation. It was familiar. Too familiar. In a blink, his mind pulled him backward through the years, past the suits and boardrooms, to a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Detroit. A threadbare couch. Faded wallpaper. His mother, Sarah Blackwell, coughing violently in the kitchen while trying to hide it from him. He had been only 10 when the coughing turned to blood, when the fainting spells began. They went to a clinic. Then another. But there was never enough money. Never the right insurance. Always a wait list, always a dead end. Ethan remembered sitting in that waiting room while his mother signed away her jewelry just for a basic test. She never got treatment. She died 6 months later. He also remembered his father, a man who disappeared the moment things got hard. One night, he left for cigarettes and never came back. Ethan didn't cry after that. He stopped trusting anyone. He started working. Studying. Planning. Not for love. Not for healing. For survival. Everything he built, his company, his reputation, it was forged from that hollow place, that cold ache of losing the only person who ever loved him. And to keep it all going, to stay protected, he buried the one thing that made him human, his heart. Now here she was. Not his mother, but the memory of her, reborn in this young woman's tearful plea. The resemblance wasn't physical, but emotional. Raw. Unfiltered. Painful. And it pierced through the armor he had spent 2 decades reinforcing. Ethan set his glass down and picked up his phone. He stared at it for a long moment, then opened a secure line to his private investigator. "Find out everything you can about her," he said quietly. "Her name is Amelia Clark." There was a pause, and then the man on the other end replied with a simple, "Yes, sir." As he hung up, Ethan stood still in the dark once more. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that the most emotionless man in its skyline was, for the first time in years, being haunted by something other than numbers and profit charts. He didn't know what he would do with the information. He only knew that he needed to understand who she was, and why, for the first time in his adult life, he couldn't sleep. Amelia's world had been shrinking for months, each day stealing more of her hope and strength. She had sold almost everything of value, the old laptop her father had given her before he disappeared, her grandmother's silver locket, and even the textbooks that had once been her lifeline to a better future. Each item sold brought in a few dollars, barely enough to cover a week's worth of medication or a hospital copay. She had pawned her favorite necklace, the one her mother gave her on her 18th birthday, because she needed to pay the taxi fare to the hospital when Linda's breathing worsened overnight. The desperation gnawed at her soul like a relentless tide. But no matter how much she begged, borrowed, or sacrificed, the money never added up to the staggering cost of her mother's treatment. She had even reached out to her professors, those she admired and trusted, asking quietly if they knew of any scholarships or emergency funds. Some offered kind words, others sympathy, but no one could unlock the kind of help she needed. The university's financial aid office told her bluntly that their resources were limited and already stretched thin. As her mother's condition deteriorated, Amelia felt herself losing grip. Linda had been admitted to the ICU after a sudden respiratory collapse, and now she lay unconscious in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically like a cruel reminder of time slipping away. The vibrant woman who had taught Amelia to read, cook, and love was gone, replaced by fragile tubes and pale skin. In the quiet hours of the night, Amelia sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand and speaking softly, hoping her voice might somehow reach beyond the coma. She felt hollow inside, swallowed by guilt and helplessness. Each breath Linda took was a gift and a torment, a painful reminder of what might be lost forever. Her heart shattered a little more every time she looked at the medical bills piling up on the nightstand. The costs were astronomical, and the reality that she might soon have to tell her mother goodbye was unbearable. One evening, in a moment of fierce clarity amid the despair, Amelia opened her laptop and typed a final email to Ethan Blackwell. She didn't expect a reply, she barely expected him to read it. But she needed to say what had been burning inside her soul, to let someone powerful understand the weight she carried. Her fingers trembled as she wrote, "If kindness is weakness, then I guess I'm proud to be weak." She told him of her mother's fight, of the impossible costs, and of a daughter's unyielding love that refused to give up. She begged for mercy, for humanity, for a sliver of hope in a world ruled by cold profit. The words poured out raw and unfiltered, a desperate plea sent into the void. After hitting send, Amelia closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, tears blurring her vision. The truth she tried to deny was now undeniable. She was ready to give up on her dreams. She had started college with the hope of becoming a nurse, to one day help people like her mother. But now, with the crushing weight of reality pressing down, she packed her textbooks into her bag, the pages worn and frayed. The thought of dropping out gnawed at her pride, but survival demanded sacrifice. She couldn't focus on classes when her mother's life hung by a thread. The world outside moved on, but Amelia felt trapped in a nightmare where hope was slipping away with every passing hour. Late one evening, when the hospital corridors were quiet and the hum of medical machines filled the sterile air, Ethan Blackwell walked through the automatic doors of St. Mary's Medical Center without announcement or fanfare. Dressed in a simple black coat and jeans, far removed from the tailored suits and polished shoes he was known for, he moved with a quiet determination that surprised even the security guard who barely glanced at him. No flashy cars, no entourage, just a man who, for reasons even he hadn't fully understood yet, was ready to cross a line he had long avoided. He found Amelia sitting beside her mother's bed, exhaustion etched deep in her eyes. The pale glow of the bedside lamp highlighted the worry and hope that still flickered beneath the surface. When she looked up and saw him, surprise and confusion flashed across her face. "Mr. Blackwell," she whispered, barely believing her own words. Ethan nodded, his voice low but firm. "I'm here to help." Without hesitation, he pulled out an embossed checkbook from the inside pocket of his coat and handed it to the nurse on duty. The amount was staggering, enough to cover the full cost of Linda's remaining treatment, medications, and even the intensive care that would be required in the coming weeks. But true to his nature, Ethan insisted on remaining anonymous. "This is between us," he told Amelia, "and it stays that way." The following morning, news of the sudden payment spread quickly through the hospital's financial department, sparking whispers and speculation. Back at Blackwell Biotech headquarters, Ethan's decision triggered an immediate storm. His executive team gathered in the sleek glass boardroom, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Sir, this could ruin our image," one senior officer argued. "Shareholders expect cold, calculated moves, not emotional charity." Another warned that word getting out might lead to demands for similar exceptions, cutting into profits and weakening investor confidence. Ethan sat at the head of the table, eyes steely and unwavering. "If anyone leaks this, I will personally ensure they are fired. No exceptions." His voice was calm but carried an unshakable authority that silenced the room. "We do not need permission to be humane. And no profit is worth the cost of my conscience." Behind the veneer of this firm declaration, however, Ethan was battling inner turmoil. The man who had spent decades building walls to protect himself from vulnerability was now confronted by a force he hadn't reckoned with, compassion. It gnawed at him, pulling him between the cold calculations of a CEO and the buried memories of a son who had lost his mother. He found himself questioning everything, the empire, the ruthless decisions, the legacy he wanted to leave behind. That night, alone in his office, Ethan stared at the city skyline, the weight of his choice settling heavily on his shoulders. For the first time in years, he wondered what it meant to truly care, to risk not just money but reputation and power for the sake of another human being. It was a gamble that could end his career, or perhaps, mark the beginning of something new. The man known as the Ice King was thawing, one fragile act of mercy at a time. A few days after Ethan's unexpected visit, Amelia received a call from the hospital's billing department. Her hands trembled as she listened to the woman on the other end confirming that the entire balance for her mother's treatment had been paid in full. Relief and disbelief washed over her in equal measure. Questions flooded her mind. Who could have done this? How is it possible? The hospital staff told her the payment had come from an anonymous donor, a generous silent angel who chose to remain unnamed. The weight of the debt that had been crushing her family was suddenly lifted, but the mystery left her both grateful and curious. She wanted to believe in miracles, but she also knew the world wasn't that kind. Unable to contain her emotions, Amelia took to social media that very evening. With a shaky hand, she crafted a heartfelt post dedicated to the unknown benefactor. She wrote about the despair that had gripped her family, the nights spent by her mother's bedside, and the hope that flickered to life because of a stranger's kindness. To the silent angel who saved my mom's life, she wrote, "Thank you for reminding us that there is still goodness in this world." Within hours, her post caught fire. Friends shared it, strangers commented with prayers and stories of their own struggles, and a local news outlet picked it up, turning Amelia's personal story into a beacon of hope for thousands. The hashtag Silent Angel began trending, sparking conversations about kindness, compassion, and the real cost of healthcare. Meanwhile, miles away in the heart of Blackwell Biotech's towering headquarters, Ethan Blackwell sat alone in his office, the glow from multiple screens reflecting off his glasses. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications and news alerts about the viral story. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was a fragile break from the stoic mask he wore so well, but it was genuine. Claire dared to speak softly, "Sir, it's good to see you smile." Ethan glanced at her, the weight of his burdens momentarily lifted. "Sometimes," he replied quietly, "doing the right thing is the hardest thing to do." The contrast was striking, the cold, distant CEO known for his unforgiving nature now watching the ripple effect of a single act of kindness he had orchestrated in secret. Yet, no one in the company knew the truth behind the payment, and Ethan was determined to keep it that way. This anonymity allowed him to observe the world's reaction without the taint of corporate PR or personal gain. He realized that real change, real impact, didn't come from public recognition or applause. It came from humble acts done in silence, without expectation. Back at the hospital, Amelia clung to the hope that now felt tangible, renewed. Her mother's health was slowly improving, each day marking a small victory. The burden of financial ruin no longer darkened their lives, and the possibility of a future, however uncertain, shone brightly ahead. For Amelia, the silent angel was not just a stranger, it was a symbol of unexpected grace and a second chance at life. And for Ethan, that second chance was the beginning of a journey he had never anticipated, a path toward redemption that would challenge everything he believed about power, profit, and the price of humanity. News of the anonymous payment didn't stay secret for long. Within days, a whistleblower from inside Blackwell Biotech quietly leaked documents and internal communications revealing Ethan Blackwell's direct involvement in covering Linda's treatment. The revelation sent shockwaves through the media and the public alike. Headlines splashed across websites and newspapers, questioning the man who had built a reputation as the Ice King. The CEO who never cared suddenly saves a dying woman, one article read. Social media exploded with disbelief, debates raging over whether this act was genuine compassion or a calculated PR move. The world was forced to reconsider the man they thought they knew. Inside Blackwell Biotech's headquarters, the leak ignited a firestorm of its own. Board members convened an emergency meeting, their voices tense and sharp. Some accused Ethan of being unprofessional, letting personal emotions cloud his judgment. "This is a business, not a charity," one executive hissed. "Showing weakness at the top will cost us shareholders' trust." Others worried the decision would set a dangerous precedent, opening floodgates for similar demands that could erode profit margins. The pressure mounted as calls for Ethan's resignation began to surface, threatening the empire he had painstakingly built. Ethan listened to the backlash with a calm that belied the turmoil beneath. When the board demanded an explanation, he stood tall and faced them with unwavering resolve. Maybe it's time the strong started feeling something, he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. Profit isn't the only measure of success. Compassion is not weakness. It is strength. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Some board members nodded in reluctant agreement, while others scowled, unwilling to accept a shift in the company's ruthless culture. Outside the walls of power, the public response was mixed but growing hopeful. Many praised Ethan's courage to break from the cold-hearted mold, seeing it as a sign that even the hardest hearts can change. Others remained skeptical, wary of ulterior motives. But one thing was clear, the story had ignited a larger conversation about ethics, humanity, and the cost of healthcare in a world driven by profit. And at the center of it all was a man who, against all odds, was beginning to rewrite his own legacy. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as Ethan Blackwell took his place at the head of the long mahogany table. The air was thick with anticipation and quiet resentment. Shareholders, once loyal and silent supporters of his relentless pursuit of profit, now faced a decision that could redefine the company's future and Ethan's legacy. Rumors had swirled for weeks about an impending vote to remove him as CEO, a response to his recent actions that some deemed reckless and dangerously emotional. The room was filled with cold stares and whispered alliances, each person calculating their next move with corporate precision. When the chairman called the meeting to order, Ethan stood, his posture unyielding despite the weight pressing down on him. He cleared his throat and began, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "If we only chase profit," he said, "we lose our humanity. Our business isn't just numbers on a balance sheet, it's people's lives. We have the power to make a difference, to lead with compassion, not just greed." The words echoed through the room, stirring a mixture of surprise, skepticism, and something quieter, hope. Some shareholders shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet his gaze. They whispered about lost profits, shareholder confidence, and the risks of mixing emotion with business. A few of the most vocal opponents stood and exited the room in protest, unwilling to accept what they saw as a betrayal of corporate values. But amidst the departing footsteps, others rose to their feet, their applause breaking the silence like a tide turning. These were the voices calling for change, for a new kind of leadership that balanced strength with empathy. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, recognizing familiar faces among those clapping, the allies who had silently supported him, the employees who believed in a better way, and the investors willing to see beyond immediate gains. It was a moment of reckoning, a crossroads where the future of Blackwell Biotech hung in the balance. Whether his tenure would end in ruin or redemption, Ethan knew this speech had already begun to rewrite the story, not just of the company, but of the man himself. As the vote proceeded, the tension remained high, but a shift had occurred. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something other than cold calculation, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, compassion could be the strongest currency of all. Ethan Blackwell's decision to step down as CEO sent ripples through the business world. It wasn't a resignation born of defeat but one fueled by a desire for change, a deliberate move to reshape his legacy on his own terms. Shortly after leaving his post, Ethan announced the creation of the Blackwell Compassion Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to making life-saving medications affordable and accessible to those who needed them most. The foundation marked a dramatic shift from the cold, profit-driven empire he had once ruled to a mission rooted in empathy and social responsibility. His announcement was met with a mixture of surprise, skepticism, and cautious optimism, but for Ethan, it was a chance to rebuild something meaningful from the ruins of his past. Meanwhile, Amelia Clark's life took an unexpected turn. Recognizing her resilience, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to her mother's recovery, the foundation offered her a full scholarship to continue her nursing education, an opportunity that had once seemed out of reach. Named in honor of Ethan's late mother, the scholarship symbolized the bridge between two families forever connected by compassion and redemption. Amelia accepted with gratitude, determined to use her education to help others facing the same struggles she had endured. Her story became a beacon of hope for countless others caught in the gaps of the healthcare system. The final moments of this journey were quiet but profound. Ethan stood at his mother's gravesite on a cool autumn afternoon, the fallen leaves swirling around him as a gentle breeze whispered through the trees. In his hand, he held a single white rose, the symbol of purity, forgiveness, and new beginnings. He knelt before the stone, tracing the name etched into the cold marble, his voice barely above a whisper. "I finally did the right thing," he said, the words heavy with both regret and relief. It was a moment of closure, a silent promise to honor the past by building a future where kindness and courage mattered more than profit margins. As Ethan rose and walked away from the grave, the weight that had once crushed his spirit felt lighter. The Ice King had melted, replaced by a man who understood that true strength came from the heart. And in that understanding lay the hope for a better world, not just for himself or Amelia, but for everyone who dared to believe that mercy could change everything. A calm, warm voice begins to speak as the screen shows gentle, hopeful images, the kind that linger in your heart long after the story ends. "You never know whose life you might save when you choose compassion over pride," the voice says softly, carrying a message that cuts deeper than any drama or conflict ever could. It's a reminder that behind every act of kindness lies the power to transform not just one life, but countless others. Compassion is not weakness, it is the bravest choice we can make, especially when pride and fear urge us to turn away. The montage unfolds like a tapestry of renewal and hope. Amelia, dressed in her nursing cap and gown, beams as she walks across the stage, receiving her diploma. Her smile is radiant, filled with the promise of a future she fought so hard to reclaim. The scene shifts to Linda, sitting by a sunlit window at home, her eyes bright and her laughter returning after months of silence. She reaches out, touching a photo of Amelia, their bond unbroken and stronger than ever. Then, the camera moves to Ethan, now dressed in casual clothes, his once rigid demeanor softened as he volunteers at a community clinic run by the Blackwell Compassion Foundation. He listens intently to patients, offers a reassuring hand, and works tirelessly to make medications affordable for those in need. The transformation is clear. This is a man who has embraced the humanity he once denied. As the montage fades, the screen darkens and the title appears in simple, elegant letters, "One moment of mercy can change everything." The words linger, a final invitation for viewers to reflect on the story's core truth. It's not just about a CEO or a desperate daughter, it's about every one of us, and the choices we make every day. Compassion is a ripple that spreads beyond the moment, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. And sometimes, that single act, the one choice to put kindness above pride, can alter the course of a life, a family, or even a future we never imagined possible. The voice fades gently, leaving behind a feeling of hope and quiet inspiration, urging everyone watching to believe in the power of mercy and the strength found in caring for one another.